really sort of 2 points up front that I think are important. There are several areas that are key to our focus on children and pesticides. Really 3 areas. One that everybody worries about is cancer in children and their relation to pesticides. The second area is endocrine disruption. You already heard a little bit about it if you were on earlier from Tyrone Hayes. And the third area, which is to me perhaps the most interesting, is the effects on children's development. As we all know, children's brain and behavior develop over quite a long period of time, beginning prior to birth in utero, with some very carefully choreographed changes in the structure of the brain. What was that? So that as we look at effects of pesticides on children, where they are in their brain develop is pretty important. And which parts of that process of brain development is occurring at a time of exposure. So it's very important to look at this development. The second part about this is we heard from Dr. Hayes a good example of how we can really structure all the evidence going from basic biology, cells and hormones, through wildlife observations, through laboratory experimentation, to development effects in people at all ages. And of course, we're talking about children. And in thinking about that process of putting all the data together, I'm going to toot our own horn. I put into the chat a paper that I published 2 years ago with Dr. Roberts, which looked at 2 almost epidemic disorders that affect children, which are autism spectrum disorder and ADHD. And we looked at it in the way I just mentioned. We looked at the laboratory evidence for the relationship between pesticides and these entities. We looked at observations in experimental animals, and then we looked at the effects in humans. And when you put all this together, you get a very nice story indicating that, yes, pesticides certainly play a role in these serious and epidemic diseases. And that's all I'm going to say today. You heard Dr. Trasande earlier. If you were on, I hope you did. And he's going to sort of expand a little bit on his talk that he gave earlier in a plenary session. Dr. Trasande.
Great. Thanks, Routt. I apologize in advance. I'm near a helipad. That's the disadvantage of being at a medical center. So that's what perhaps the background noise was earlier, so I muted myself. So I'll keep my comments brief. I look forward to the discussion here, and specifically, I'll just generally make a comment that it's sad that one has to actually make an economic case at some level. I mean, this is an economic decision to have pesticides used. I mean, there's a corporate decision at some level that is communicated all the way to human health effects. And it's often that we have to put the economic costs of the inaction or the cost of the exposure in the first place, and put the burden on the exposed population to document, to show the effects before we act. What I find really striking about the impacts of pesticides on all of us, and particularly kids, is that the costs are so large and so preventable at a societal level. But as a pediatrician, that's not something I like to do day in and day out. I like to take care of kids and improve their lives. But ultimately, it's by really making the trade-offs really stark that we can sometimes move the needle in the way that we do. So I'm really delighted to be here, and I'll stop there for now. You're muted.
He's still muted. He's still muted.
I figured it out. Our second participant is, who you haven't yet met, is Dr. Maida Galvez, who's from Mount Sinai, one of our co-conveners, and a brilliant researcher. Maida?
Thank you so much, Dr. Reigart. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here and want to thank Beyond Pesticides for bringing us all together and for your leadership in the field of children's environmental health for many, many decades. Especially appreciate being here together with an old friend, Leo Trasande, and with a new friend, Miss Lewis. It's been really wonderful to get to know you over the last week or so. This is my first time presenting at this actual conference. So I'm actually sharing a couple of slides, but it's very informal and meant to be a conversation. So if you can hang with me while I upload.
We need some intermission music. There we go.
There we are. Okay, so. All right, folks, see that?
Yes.
So just the goal of this talk, so I'm an environmental pediatrician at Mount Sinai. Leo and I trained together. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're trying to integrate screening for environmental exposures into well child care in the pediatric practice at Mount Sinai and beyond. And so essentially, we want all children to be prescribed healthy homes. So for the children that are living in substandard housing that return to conditions like this on a daily basis, we want to ensure that environmental asthma triggers, lead peeling paint that contains lead, and exposures to pests and pesticides are both reduced and prevented. And the New York City Department of Health Environmental Health Data Portal has these really incredible data stories that they have on their website now that shows neighborhood maps. And so on the right, you see a neighborhood map that many of you have likely seen before. And the darker areas are often used to attribute communities that are most afflicted by common chronic conditions in childhood, like asthma and childhood lead poisoning that predominantly affect Black and Brown communities. And if you look at this map, it's actually showing those same communities are afflicted by 3 or more healthy housing problems defined by cracks and holes in the walls, and problems with pests and peeling paint. And so these health disparities are rooted in substandard housing conditions that were a result of policies that drove residential segregation and disinvestment that then resulted in the substandard housing conditions that are seen right here in New York City. So as a pediatrician, we think it's very important to share the stories of our patients because many are not aware that these substandard conditions exist right here in our own backyards. We also want to prescribe healthy schools for all children. And this is a school that was relocated to this building from a prior building in the Bronx that was formerly an auto mechanic and lamp manufacturer. And expose children to high levels of chemicals. And we also want to prescribe outdoors and nature to children, particularly in playgrounds and parks that are safe and free of harmful environmental exposures like pesticides. That's why it's so exciting to be presenting with Bertha Lewis today. And lastly, we want to prescribe healthy communities. And this is a fit zone located outside of NYCHA houses across the street from Mount Sinai. It's Carver houses. And this was a public-private partnership with the Trust for Public Land that got this sited at the first public housing complex in the city. It's an adult fit zone that's appropriate for those ages 13 and older. And what this does is it gets families from public housing outdoors, where air quality is often better. Indoor air quality is often 15 times worse than outdoor air quality, and active. And so this is something that we want to do. We want to encourage for all families to encourage healthy, active lifestyles. And so if you have concerns about environmental exposures, including pesticides, there are go-to resources available on the National PESU website. That's the Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Unit. You can see that the website has information both for healthcare professionals and for the general public in English and Spanish, and it can point you essentially to evidence-based resources that can help guide you to either counsel your patients on how to prevent and reduce exposures, or how you as a family can reduce your exposures. We're really fortunate in that the PESU network, which is funded by CDC and EPA and managed by the American Academy of Pediatrics, has 10 units across the country. And you can find your PESU, your regional PESU, by going to this website. In New York State, we have one of the first state-funded centers for children's environmental health. So there are 10 centers in the country for PESU, and there are 7 New York State children's environmental health centers located here in New York. And we're hoping that this is the first of many states to take the PESU model and implement it at the state level. And what you see here is a picture of our partners across New York State. Mount Sinai serves as a coordinating center, but there are centers at children's hospitals in Albany, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, Westchester, New York City, and Long Island. And our goal is to integrate pediatric environmental health into well child care in the general pediatrics clinic. And so they're called NYCHA for short. And so what we're doing is taking the guidance that exists in the seminal texts for pediatric environmental health and putting them into practice. And so these are some of the go-to resources for children's environmental health, whether it's the AAP or American Academy of Pediatrics Pediatric Environmental Health textbook, which is the go-to resource. We also call it the Green Book, or the Textbook of Children's Environmental Health by leaders in the field, edited by Drs. Landrigan and Ruth Etzel, or training materials, Pediatrics in Review, that's available for pediatric residents, to ensuring that environmental health content exists in Bright Futures, which is the AAP guide for reimbursable services in pediatrics practice. So we're trying to ensure that clinicians in child health are able to be reimbursed for services they provide when it comes to environmental services in the clinic. A couple of other quick resources that are really amazing go-to resources are the Story of Health. This was developed by our PESU colleagues in California. It's a multimedia ebook and it's case-based. So you can look at a case of childhood cancer and look at the evaluation in terms of running through an environmental history and what can be done for that child in terms of looking forward with respect to how to prevent and reduce exposures. And then there's the National Environmental Education Foundation, which is another great resource. So these are Dr. Lauren Zajac and Dr. Erin Thanek in the top photo, and the right photo are clinical directors. They're the ones that are working hand in hand with our general pediatrics practice to get environmental health screening into the social determinants of health screening that's been largely implemented, not only at Mount Sinai, but at hospitals across the country, both for children and adults. And so what they've done is they're not only asking about housing instability, which is a critically important issue in homes, but they've added screening for pesticides and pests in the home to routine screening of children when they're seen for well child care. And so they're essentially connecting the dots between pediatric practitioners, families, healthy homes concerns, and connecting them to the interventions that they need to reduce their exposures to both pests and pesticides in the home. And this is something that we call environmental health e-screening and prescriptions for prevention, where we screen, counsel, and refer families. And so here you see our environmental health screener. So think about where you live. Do you have any of these common problems? And please select all that apply. And you can see that it encompasses pest problems like cockroaches, mice, rats, and other pests. And then questions about specifically use of chemical pesticides, either by the family or by an exterminator in or around the home, which encompasses both inside and outside. If they screen positive in the general pediatrics clinic, they're then given this guidance. And this is the prescription for prevention. It has key messages taken from the Green Book and tailored to really simplify those messages so the busy clinician can provide guidance to families in the 15-minute visit. So I can tell you that I myself, as a general pediatrician, often don't get to this unless a family raises it, because the visit is so packed trying to address specific health concerns. And so for the busy clinician, this allows them to even think about integrating environmental health into the clinic. And Dr. Zajac and our team leads, Jen Acevedo and Joseph Wilson, are working with a team of screeners in the general pediatrics practice that encompasses folks like medical students and PhD students, and also working hand in hand with asthma counselors and social workers. And so you can see on the first page key messages about what you can do. And we say that these key messages are rooted in what, so what, now what. So what's the problem? Why do I care about it? And what should I do about it? And so the back links families to resources locally that can work to address the concern at hand. And this is these prescriptions for prevention were developed from a National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences Intercenter collaboration grant that was given to our P30 Center that married 5 regional PACUs together with community engagement cores in those same regions. And you see all those partners there. And Joseph Wilson is available if you're interested in exploring how to tailor these prescriptions for prevention to your region. Joseph Wilson is the contact, and his email is listed there. There's also a QR code if you're interested in taking a look at the prescriptions for prevention that exist. As I mentioned, they are available in English and Spanish, and our COVID prescriptions for prevention are available in 9 languages. And so this is the most important part of prevention and reduction of exposures. And this is Ray Lopez, who is a dedicated and true champion for children's environmental health, not only in East Harlem, but beyond. And he runs the environmental health program at Little Sisters for the Assumption in East Harlem, and is the deputy director now there. And he works with a team that can go into the home and address pest concerns, and they literally transform the home. And it's pretty amazing to see before and after pictures related to the work that they've done and how that really directly benefits families and communities, not only in East Harlem, but in the greater New York City area. And so that screening, counseling, and referral program is, if you want more information about it, you can go to our website, but it's really rooted in action. It's meant to get families the resources they need to address the environmental concern. And environmental concerns related to pesticides exposure has been raised recently by a congressional report on heavy metals in baby foods and fruit juices and arsenic in soil and the uptake of that arsenic in the foods that we eat, and particularly foods that are manufactured for and targeted specifically for infants and babies has specifically been examined. And there's guidance on evidence-based messages that you can share with families if you have concerns, or if you're a parent or a caregiver and have concerns about what these exposures may mean for a child. And a medical student that from upstate Syracuse drafted a blog that's in the American Academy of Pediatrics Voices newsletter. And so it's a great resource to go to for additional guidance if you have concerns about heavy metals like arsenic, which was a pesticide previously used routinely for agriculture for fruit like apples. And so this screening program is being used broadly, not only at Mount Sinai, but across our New York State network, and being shared with regional PACU partners and National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences P30 centers in other regions. And so they can be applied more broadly if you're interested in exploring that. I just wanted to flag, I'm near the end, I just wanted to flag the importance of Children's Environmental Health Day and raising awareness about children's environmental health issues. And this was a celebration of our first Children's Environmental Health Day, where we secured a state proclamation acknowledging this, and several cities in New York State have subsequent proclamations recognizing it. And so we encourage you to participate in CEH Day events on the second Thursday of October. It's celebrated every year. And if you're interested in securing a proclamation for your region, you can go to the Children's Environmental Health Network website, where they have template materials that you can share with your legislators so that you can request an official proclamation. And lastly, prescriptions for prevention and everything we do as pediatricians is really focused on prevention. And the most important way to prevent exposures for children and their families is through legislation. And so just pointing to two pieces of legislation, the one that Bertha Lewis is going to speak to, and have a couple of headlines from New York City: bans pesticides in park with push from unlikely force, children, how children truly are often the most effective messengers. And there's Dr. Sarah Evans, who some of you may have heard from in yesterday's events or earlier today at a hearing on pesticides in New York City parks. And then Dr. Megan Horton, who has done research on chlorpyrifos, presented at a congressional hearing on supporting the ban of chlorpyrifos. And so important for the science to get out to decision makers, both by scientists and clinicians, but also by the public. And speaking with one voice is what gets us to the finish line. And so with that, I think we all want to envision together a healthy environment. This is a competition that we're sponsoring to submit entries that we'll be presenting on Children's Environmental Health Day on what your vision for a healthy community looks like in the post-COVID world. But super grateful to our co-panelists, Leo and Bertha and Routt, for getting us to where we are today, and just to acknowledge the successes that we've already had, but the future successes to come. And so I'm going to pass it off to Bertha, but I'm going to play a video highlighting her work, and hopefully
it'll play.
That's right. It had to go back to the beginning. I apologize if we have to listen to a commercial. But maybe what I'll do is I will go offline and queue it up, but I'll turn it over to you for now, if that's okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Maida. You know, I was gonna have this big intro with like very dramatic and everything, but it's the demon of technology. But you'll be able to see it, and I'll talk to this horrifying commercial. But in any case, my name is Bertha Lewis. I am from the Black Institute. Now, people that have known me my prior life to that, I was the chief organizer for Icahn, the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. And we survived the horrifying right-wing attack that is still going on. So you can survive. In this little short video, what we never thought would happen is that we would be able to actually get a law passed in the New York City Council. And for all you advocates out there, just know and understand, you're right, they're wrong, fight, and keep on fighting, because we are arrayed against giants. We put out a report called Poison Parks. And this report came from a time of, there's a group called Reverend Billy and the Stop Shopping Choir. And I know Reverend Billy, and they do a lot of performances, and they have a big push against Monsanto every year, who makes this horrible chemical called Roundup. And you guys see commercials about it all the time, especially for folks in suburbia. It's like, spray this chemical and you'll be able to get rid of weeds. And now we're legalizing weed. So that's another kind of weed, but still, wanting to kill nature. Since 2014, we worked on this, and we didn't get it passed until 2021. So you got to hang in there. You got to know that you're right, and you got to know to do this. So Maida, do we have that little video that people can see our background? Were you able to share that with us? Maida? No? Okay. Oh, here we go.
Go.
Because I really want you guys to see this, because it's true. Oh, and see, they're even trying to spray
There you go.
Dogs and cats. Here we go.
An organization use of chemical pesticides over the past several years, but now there's a call to stop using them.
One organization says they're using them more in communities of color, declaring environmental and racism. CBS 2's Vanessa Murdoch reports.
Poison parks. That's the claim of a special report just released by the Black Institute. The focus, New York City's use of the chemical pesticide glyphosate, a likely carcinogen that's found in the weed killer Roundup. The Black Institute asserts the city engaged in environmental racism by using the pesticide more frequently and at higher concentrations in parks used by people of color.
Folks in those communities that on a nice day, they don't go to the Hamptons, they don't have a place upstate, they go to their local park, they enjoy the city around them.
I asked the Parks Department if it employs environmental racism. In a statement, Parks replied, the racial analysis in this report does not align with reality. The report released Wednesday, the same day, members of City Council held a hearing on Bill 1524. This is author Ben Kalos.
This bill basically says glyphosate and other carcinogens can't be sprayed on city property, particularly our parks.
Kalos introduced a similar bill years ago after listening to kindergartners from PS 290 sing.
No way, no spray, ban toxic pesticides.
Some of the same students showed up to testify.
It'll affect a lot of people in a positive way. I don't want me or any of my siblings, anyone else who I don't even know, running around in the park and getting sick from the pesticides.
Deputy Commissioner Liam Kavanaugh says Parks supports not using chemical pesticides, but acknowledged it would limit managing invasive species.
We estimate that it might take 3 to 5 mechanical applications to replace one successful application of a properly used and targeted herbicide.
Bill sponsors expressed confidence they have veto-proof majority to get the bill passed this spring. Vanessa Murdoch, CBS 2 News.
The Black Institute report also wants glyphosate banned at a state level.
Okay, and that is the cover of our report. And anyone that needs it, just contact the organizers here. I'd be glad to send out a copy to anyone, or you can just go to our website, theblackinstitute.org. So let me just back up a little bit. I wanted you to see that because a lot of times people don't even know that they're exposed to stuff. They don't know that they're being harmed unless they see it on television, unless someone points it out to them. They have no idea. As my organizer said, poor people, people of color, where are we going to go? We don't have summer homes. You go to your urban parks, Central Park, Prospect Park. Any of you in New York City, as soon as there was even the slight hint post-COVID to get outside, folks went outside, you get on your stoop, and you will go to the playground. We take our children to the playgrounds. Our children play soccer and all other kind of sports on playing fields. And so we don't have any other place to go. Maida talked about being in your home, especially for poor people and people of color. Lead, peeling paint, pests, who in New York City has not seen a roach? I don't know anybody that hasn't seen a roach. And in poor neighborhoods, even moderate income neighborhoods, especially in neighborhoods of color, one pest after another. And we are constantly encouraged to use pesticides. Landlords don't give a damn. They don't care. It is so good, as Maida pointed out, that you have someone that will come in and try to help you safeguard your home for you and your children. But we wanted to concentrate on outside because this spraying of chemicals has just become a regular thing for people here in New York. You want to get rid of mosquitoes, and they tell you, close your windows. West Nile is coming to spray. But in our parks, in our so-called green spaces, glyphosate is one of the most popular herbicides that they spray. And, we know it is Roundup. We know that gigantic corporation Monsanto that merged. They love to merge with Bayer. They give you your aspirin for your headache, the headache that these pesticides cause you to have. And they're just used indiscriminately in New York City parks. They are not probably a carcinogen. They are a carcinogen. Don't let anybody tell you that they're not. They've been linked to every kind of disease, from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancers, kidney damage. How many people of color do you know that have kidney damage? Okay? And we just kind of, that's just the way it is. Birth defects, kids born with all kind of abnormalities. We've seen it. You know about the famous lawsuit of this man, Lee Johnson, Dwayne Lee Johnson in 2019. He sued Monsanto and he won, going up against this gigantic thing. He had all kind of lesions, all on his hands, all on his body. But you gotta fight. You gotta fight for your own health. The way that we understood this was when Reverend Billy said, you know, they're spraying this stuff right around public housing here in New York City. We call it New York City Housing Authority, or NYCHA for short. It's, you know, you actually have to dig like you are an environmental archaeologist for the information. You have to send out FOIA requests, Freedom of Information requests. You would think, oh yeah, this is public information. They wouldn't hide anything harmful. You have to search for it. They are not going to give it to you. And here's what we found. You always hear, whether it's the coronavirus, poverty, it doesn't matter. The constant refrain is that people of color are disproportionately affected, and somehow or another this becomes background music. But when they say people of color are disproportionately affected, these are real people. These are people that you pass. These are people that you know. These are people that you see. These are children. So anytime this disproportionate line is used, think about that. Why is that disproportionate? Once again, in New York City, you want to spray poison? Let's spray that poison 2 to 3 times more in communities of color. And you know what? It doesn't even matter if you're doing well. You could be an executive on Wall Street, but if you got a lot of melanin, guess what? It don't matter. In Queens and Brooklyn, you know, there are 50 parks and playgrounds, and of the 50 that we studied, 42 of them in Harlem, in Queens, and Brooklyn, they were sprayed 4 to 10 times more than a Manhattan white neighborhood or a Staten Island neighborhood. And any neighborhood that is more than 62% Black and brown was sprayed the worst. We've got higher hospitalizations. These are your kids. These are your children. You know what children do. Everything goes into their mouth. I mean, how are you going to stop them? You know, you take them to the park to just get Johnny some fresh air, and boom, they're rolling around on the grass, picking it up, throwing it all over them. You know, anybody that has kids or has seen kids know. Whether it was lightly sprayed or not, or sprayed 2 weeks ago, children and parks that have been sprayed with these herbicides and pesticides, this is not a safe environment. And parks, playgrounds, playing fields that are near neighborhoods of color that Black and brown people use the most, they get hit the worst. It's no wonder when COVID hit, there were, again, sort of like a throwaway line of course, Black and brown children, Black and brown adults are going to be hit harder by the coronavirus. Yeah, because they've been exposed to all of this stuff. So I'm not going to go on longer because I do want to hear from all of you, but just know they fought us tooth and nail. And in that little clip, you know, that guy that you saw testifying and that thing that like, oh, the Black Institute in their report, they didn't know what they were talking about. And, oh, we have to spray this poison because otherwise we'd have to do it 2 or 3 times more. Then hire more people and do it 2 or 3 times more. Jesus, it's either money or it's time or, organic land management just doesn't count. We did it since 2014. We got this bill passed on Earth Day this year, April 22nd. But unfortunately, we want this to be a model for other cities, other towns, other municipalities, and we want to bring it all across New York State. But here's a tip. Wherever you are, we'll help you do it. We'll help you write the legislation. We'll tell you about all of the hurdles that you're going to go through and all the objections you're going to have. But just check out whoever calls themselves progressive in your city. Our progressive mayor Bill de Blasio, this bill passed unanimously. There's 51 city council members, 51 of them voted for this, and he still to this day refuses to sign it into law. But you know what? That's all right, Billy Bob, because you don't have to sign. In New York City, if something passes and doesn't get signed within 30 days, it passes into law. So everyone here in New York City, we've passed it. There's an 18-month phase-in, but we're going to celebrate. So if you're in New York City this Thursday, May 27th at 4 p.m., down at Battery Park, right near the Urban Farm in Battery Park, right near the ferry, near Bowling Green. Come and join us. We're having a press conference, a rally where we're celebrating the passage of this bill. If we could do it in New York City, you could do it where you are too. So thank you all. I hope you have questions.
Thank you, Bertha. So we have about 20 minutes for questions. I'd encourage you to put them in the chat, either in chat or questions. I've only seen one substantive question so far, which is there's a lot of talk about chlorpyrifos. What about all the other organophosphates? Do they cause the same effects? And I have an answer for that, but I'm interested for Maida or Leo. How do you respond to that?
I can start if you like.
Sure.
There's what we know and there's what we don't know. And all too often we see shifts in chemical ingredients in products, and we see the replacements being as problematic as the ones that are currently used. There's already substantial evidence that other organophosphate pesticides, as well as other classes of pesticides, are neurotoxic and particularly toxic to the developing brains of children. One category that I would just throw out there are the pyrethroids that exemplify this issue. But I'll stop there and look forward to others' comments.
Maida, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, it's Maida.
Maida, excuse me.
No worries. I hesitate to answer a pesticide question when Dr. Reigart is on the phone.
Go ahead.
Maida, I felt the same way.
So I don't even dare go there. But what I will say is that, when a pesticide question comes to us, Beyond Pesticides is one of our go-to resources. And you have these amazing fact sheets that are in plain language that are readily shared with families. I posted it. National Pesticide Information Center is also another resource. You can get somebody on the line that can give you guidance right away. And Poison Center. With the PACEs, we tend to deal with more low level chronic exposure and more common exposures, like what I was talking about in the talk around pesticides exposures in the home for pests. But also on the research side, translating the latest science so we can give it to decision makers in a way that can help inform the legislation. So I will end there because I would love to hear Dr. Reigart's and
well, let me just say one thing. With my advanced age, when I came into the pesticide arena, we were still using organochlorine pesticides, such as DDT, which was the subject of Silent Spring. Then the decision was made for all sorts of mostly financial reasons, Leo, to go into the organophosphates because they had acute effects, but were thought not to have chronic effects. And then we started, as we've already talked about, when we learned that the organophosphates were toxic, we shifted to pyrethroids, and now we're more and more recognizing the effect. These are just the insecticides now. And now we're in the neonics. So I've seen this every time we find a given class of pesticides is bad, all of a sudden we have a whole nother class of pesticides come along. With regard to organophosphates, well, two things I'll say about that. One is we now recognize, and Leo talked about it earlier, that even at low levels, particularly in utero, organophosphates do have effects on the outcome that can be even shown at 6 or 7 years of age with developmental delays. So the kinds of exposures that folks living and housing in New York City are exposed to have been definitely shown to have effects. I'd like to share an experience Dr. Roberts and I had. We are the editors of the pesticide manual from EPA entitled Recognition and Management of Pesticide Poisonings. And when we worked on the 5th edition, we were forbidden to talk about chronic effects of pesticides. We were only allowed under our contract to write about the acute effects. When we went in the 6th edition, we refused to do it unless EPA would at least allow us to put one chapter on the chronic effects of pesticides. And that chapter is in there, and you can find it in the EPA website. But an inside story is there was a lot of pushback from within EPA to that chapter and what it said. And our project officer, when he was confronted with that, and we said, we're not going to change it, he said, well, it's your manual. Go ahead and leave it as it is. However, if you look at the EPA website, there's a disclaimer about that part of it that was put in there when they put it up online. So there is a lot of resistance still within some of our governmental agencies to recognizing the chronic effects of pesticides, even though there's more and more evidence for them. And someone asked about pyrethroids. We're learning more. There are developmental effects. Every 15 years we get more evidence about it, the newer class. So we're still learning more about the effects of the pyrethroids. And one of the questions that just came up was about the synergist, piperonyl butoxide, which does, particularly with inhalation, have adverse effects. But actually that allows me to speak to something that is also important. In all of these pesticide formulations, there's 1 or 2 or 3% of the so-called active ingredient, but all of them have many so-called inert ingredients, which are often very toxic. Solvents, a lot of toxic solvents, and are not revealed. They're not on the label,
Right.
and you cannot find out what they are. And Maida, you might want to speak to this as a practicing physicians. It's very frustrating when you have a child that's exposed to something and you think something that's in there that's not listed on the label might be part of the effect. You really want to know that. And hiding these is a real problem for practicing physicians. Maida, you want to comment on inerts?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I think that it can be difficult even for us as clinicians and scientists to navigate that information and try to get to the bottom line in terms of good guidance for families. So we can only imagine how challenging this is for families to even get to sort of the bottom line on what is a safer choice. And so, at the end of the day, that's why the legislation is so important. And the research framework that does the work before it's placed on the marketplace is critically important, as opposed to the existing framework where we do the work after it's already widely available and in use. So, for us, the bottom line is prevention, legislation, and education, and making sure that we're all on the same page and speaking with one voice.
Well, I would, I'm I'm not an expert. I mean, I delved into glyphosates, and I see a lot of questions about, different things that even I've never heard of. But let me just caution everybody. Trust no one. Do not trust them. Someone in the comments talked about greenwashing. Greenwashing is just as bad as whitewashing. And, you would think washing anything would make it better. But guess what? All they're doing is painting over stuff, and they come up with these different terms, and they come up and they lie to you and say, this is safe. I mean, when we passed this legislation here in New York City, we fought like hell. We got 99.9% of what we wanted, but it still gets phased in over 18 months. Why? Because they're ignorant. And also because they just don't want to do it. I know it seems impossible, but a lot of our parks department and gardeners and agricultural people, they really have no idea how to manage land or how to get rid of what they consider pests other than chemicals. They just don't know. They don't know about organic land management. They don't know, landlords don't know about how to make sure that their apartments and their dwellings are safer, just as we are all going through constantly being aware of and figuring out what are healthy foods, just as we now know not all plastics are recyclable, and it's a double-edged sword that we were all locked down for a year because we had to be in our houses just a little bit more, and you had to be more aware. And yes, you do need to read labels more. But, to me, my thing for everyone here is whether you think you're an expert or not, and whether you've been doing this a while or not, the doctors on here and the pediatricians and the scientists on here is even today, if you think you know everything, be skeptical, trust no one, question everything, read every label that you can. And quite frankly, when people try to show you a product or tell you about something, and my rule of thumb is if the word is too damn long and I got to look it up in the dictionary and you can't just break it down to me, that is suspect. So question everything. And if you don't know, just call Beyond Pesticides. They'll tell you.
So, Leo, did you have a comment? No. Okay.
Nothing to add.
Let me just say up front that later in this conference, we'll actually be talking about organic land management. And I should point out that Beyond Pesticides has been very active in working with towns and cities on organic land management. As you heard, we were involved in helping promote the project in New York. I think one of the pictures that was up there showed Jay as part of the testimony. And we do have resources. Beyond Pesticides has resources to work with local municipalities, local entities of any sort to convert to organic land management. And this is really a growing movement, and it's very exciting that the New York has done it. New York City has done it. Do we have other questions? It sort of popped up about why aren't inert ingredients on the label? Forever and after, they've been defined as proprietary or trade secrets, which the way the law is written don't have to be revealed, which is...
It's a reason it's a secret.
And it's actually fairly bizarre in the sense that any one of these companies are capable of reverse engineering. They can go in and find out what's in there. The real reason that they're kept as trade secrets is not for competition, to keep us from knowing what's in there. And that's something that needs to be changed and has been an interest of all of us a long time. One of the questions that has come up, and I'm interested in the other panelists, is in a year or two ago, we had this big Zika scare. What do you think we should be doing about the mosquitoes? And I was in New York when y'all were all worried about equine encephalitis, and they were spraying all of New York, and I was on one of the TV stations saying they shouldn't be spraying all of New York to prevent encephalitis. And now we're doing it with Zika. What do you all think about mosquito control and its relationship to effects on children? Any panelists? Maida, what?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question, and in this time after COVID, in terms of our risk and perception of risk, and the things that we're willing to do in the case of knowns versus unknowns, and uncertainty, and we're always sort of I always feel like I sound like a broken record because we always err on the side of precaution and prevention, and reducing exposures that we know to be harmful. And so I think that that's something that would be revisited in this time, quite honestly, in terms of known harms versus unknown harms. And as a parent, I can tell you that I was a little bit dismayed that, they would close parks for a period of time due to the spraying, when, what we need for kids